I know that it's not uncommon for people to believe that pastors are some sort of spiritual giant. And but that's just not true. I know that's surprising to you about me, but it's not true. We're just not. We're regular people. We happen to have been called by God to do a specific task, to have a specific calling. But it's just not true. We're just not the spiritual kinds of giants that many think we are. And if you don't believe me, I'll give you an example. The other day, I was running from meeting to meeting, and I was going from task to task. I was super busy, and my day had started out around 5:30 in the morning that day, and I was running around Reagan, and it didn't end until close to 6. It was a really long day, and it was followed by making sure that my kids were in the right places. They all had activities that night, and so I was driving kids around, making sure they were in the right place. And then, I got to the end of the day, and I was exhausted, and I hit my pillow late that night, and I couldn't believe all that I had accomplished in the day, and I was totally wiped. And you've all had days like this, right? Like you wake up, you go, you get home, you keep going, and then you go to bed, and then you start it all over the next day. And so when my head finally hit the pillow, I was really relieved. I'd gotten through this really busy day, but then I was also sort of disturbed. Relieved because I had made it through the day successfully, but disturbed because of something that happened in the midst of this chaotic day. You see, in the middle of the day, a gentleman had came to the church who was in need of some help, and I was the only pastor available at the time. But man, my time was so crunched that day. Like I was just moving from minute to minute with absolutely everything I had, and so I was irritated with this interruption that I now needed to care for the needs of this guy, right? Like in my mind, I'm thinking, I don't have time for this. It's terrible, right? But this is what's going on. And yet I just kind of pushed through it. I attended to the man's questions. I listened as best I could. But internally, I was just trying to figure out how I could end this interaction as quickly as possible so that I could get back to the work that I was doing. And so ultimately, I did the simplest thing I could, and I sent this man on his way. And from there, I went back to my office and put my head down, and I got back to work. And as I went to bed that night, I just could not shake the look on this man's face when I so quickly dismissed him. I felt terrible. Yeah, the work I had to do was important. Yeah, I was busy that day. But at the end, I was faced with this stark reality that I completely botched this interaction with this man. And I wonder, can anybody else relate to that experience in life? I'm not alone, right? I mean, at that moment, I felt so terrible that here I am in the middle of a series called Won't You Be My Neighbor? And I was not very neighborly in that moment. And then I was reminded of the story of Jesus, which I wish I had been reminded of the story of Jesus, because it was really convicting to think about. It's actually one of my favorite stories in all the Bible. It makes me wonder if I could ever be the kind of person that Jesus was. It makes me desire to want to be the kind of person that Jesus was and is. And so Jesus, even though I'm so easy at dismissing the needs of other people, Jesus examples the exact opposite. In fact, Jesus doesn't just welcome the needs of others, he actually seeks them out. He seeks them out. And so let me just bring you to this story. It's in Luke chapter 7, all right? Luke chapter 7. If you have a Bible, you can turn there with me. Or if you have your phone, you can download the YouVersion app and you can follow along that way as well. Or everything will be on the screens as well. And so as you do, let me just welcome you to the fourth week of this series we're doing called Won't You Be My Neighbor? And we're looking at how we, Genesis Church, how we can be great neighbors in the worlds in which God has placed us. How can we be great neighbors to the people in our lives? And so we've been looking at 5 key components on how we can be great neighbors. And we talked the first week about that we're called to go. We're called to go into the world and be the people of Jesus in the world. And that being a great neighbor really begins with prayer and praying for our neighbors and praying for opportunities. We looked at the thing that we have to do more than just about anything else is to learn to listen better. That the truth that we might have to say is not the thing that we lead with. Instead, we listen to those in our lives. We listen to those in our lives. And we've been looking at this series wondering how can we be better neighbors? And if you missed any of those weeks, by the way, go to our website and you can follow along that way. But in Luke chapter 7, we see another key component of us being a great neighbor. And in Luke chapter 7, you see Jesus do something that I'm going to argue most of us never do. But I often wonder, what would happen if we did? What would happen if we did? So let's look at this story. What happens in Luke chapter 7? So start in verse 11. It says, as soon afterward, Jesus went with his disciples to the village of Nain. Now just real quick, Nain is nowhere. There is one street in the city of Nain that goes in and out. It is at the edges of nowhere. Okay, so Jesus is walking about the area of Galilee, and he comes to this tiny little nowhere town called Nain. All right, so he's with his disciples in the village of Nain, and a large crowd followed him. A funeral procession was coming out as he approached the village gate. The young man who had died was a widow's only son, and a large crowd with the village was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart overflowed with compassion. Don't cry, he said. Okay, stop there, because at this point, Jesus' popularity is off the charts. Jesus is performing miracles. He's teaching all around Galilee. He's gathered this small group of young guys who he is teaching and who he is leading, who's called to be his closest followers. And the text says that there is a large crowd following him. And we don't know how large it is, but we can kind of guess, because in other places in the Bible, it talks about Jesus having thousands of people with him, following him, listening with him. At times there were tens of thousands of people with Jesus. Right? There are a lot of demands on Jesus right now. And he is on his way to Jerusalem. He is on his way to fulfill the mission that he came to earth, to die for our sins, to raise again, to give us the hope of new life. And as he's going, his followers are with him. These thousands of people are following him, waiting for his next move. He sees a woman and a funeral procession come out of this town in the middle of nowhere. Now, nobody could blame Jesus for having little time for anything but what he's currently doing. This is a busy guy. He has got a lot on his plate, right? And he can only have time for what is right in front of him. But then this. You know, Jesus is simply passing by on his way to somewhere else. It would have been so easy for him to just keep walking. In fact, it would not have affected anything that he was doing at the moment. I mean, he had no reason to even acknowledge this funeral happening off in the distance, let alone take any interest in it. And yet Jesus decides, with 10,000 people around him, to make a little detour and do something in the midst of a very tragic situation. Because here's the deal. At this moment, this woman who is walking her young son, dead son, out of this town has lost everything. We know from the text that she's a widow, which means that her husband has passed away. And then now her one and only son has passed away. And in the first century, that was a big deal for a woman. It was a big deal. Her self-worth, her self-esteem has been just shattered because these men that have been in her life, these men that she loved, were not just there for her to love, but they were also there to care for her, to protect her, and to give her status in her own social circles. And all that has been taken from her. All of it. As if losing her entire family was bad enough, she was about to enter into a life of struggle. Financial struggle, social struggle, and otherwise. And somehow, through all of the commotion of the crowds following Jesus, Jesus notices this woman and the situation at hand. And the craziest part is, he actually does something about it. He actually does something. He doesn't ignore it. Nobody would have blamed him for just walking by. He doesn't even simply acknowledge it. He actually goes over and he does something about it. Look at what he does. Luke chapter 7, verse 14. Then he walked over to the coffin and touched it, and the bearers stopped. "Young man," he said, "I tell you, get up." Then the dead boy sat up and began to talk. And Jesus gave him back to his mother. It's crazy, right? I mean, Jesus just right then and there, he resuscitates this man. Brings him back to life. But you know what's crazier? What happens before it. What's even crazier about the story is that Jesus detours his life, his mission, his calling to go help this woman and this young man. And you know what? It's so crazy that I believe that sort of craziness has the power to change the world. It does. I am convinced that the greatest contribution we can make in our world is a willingness to do something. A willingness to serve others in a practical, meaningful way. And as I proved earlier, this is no easy task at times. Do something for those around us. Doing something for those around us is often really, really hard. It's hard to even take the moment to think about what we could do. Yet Jesus gives us an example of how we can be neighbors who are willing to do something in the lives of those around us. So let's just recap real quick, because there are three things happen that result in Jesus doing something, in Jesus serving this woman and her situation. Right? Go back to verse 13. It says that Jesus is walking with his followers, right? He's got this huge crowd, and the text says that Jesus saw. That's the first thing that happens. That Jesus saw. And this is essential, I think, to us doing something, serving people in our lives. If we want to do something for our neighbors, we have to see the need. We have to see it. I don't know if anybody else, Jesus saw what was going on, but Jesus saw it. Jesus saw the need. And this is where it starts for him. He sees the situation. He sees the need. And he doesn't turn a blind eye to what is happening in this woman's life. Certainly Jesus could have simply looked the other way, but he doesn't. His focus is captured by this woman and the situation that she's in. So let me ask you, when was the last time you took careful notice of a need in someone's life? I wonder if it's more common for us to turn a blind eye to the needs in those in our lives than willing to see them for what they are. And listen, the need, it doesn't have to be as dramatic as Jesus. Right? It could be as simple as watching your neighbor's kids so they can go to work or to take care of a few errands. It could be as simple as seeing the neighbor trying to trim his trees by himself and being willing to go over and help. Or it could be willing to see your coworker who you know needs help moving to their new apartment or their new house. I mean, the list of needs is endless in our world. The list of needs in our neighbors' lives are endless. But are we willing to see them? Or are we willing to just ignore them? Jesus saw what was happening in this woman's life. But he didn't just see it. He actually did something about it. He actually gave something up to be a part of what this woman's life was mounting to. In verse 13, when the Lord saw her, his heart overflowed with compassion, it says. That he saw this situation, and that what he saw, it caused something in him to stir. It caused him to be compassionate to the woman and the situation. In other words, Jesus gave care. My mom used to say that all the time to me. She said, just give a care once in a while. She'd say that about my homework. because I didn't give a care. She'd say, just give a care and you'll get better grades. And that just always is ringing in my head when I see situations of like, if we just gave a care to what is happening in a person's life. Jesus does this. And let's be honest, even if we see the needs of our neighbors, we don't always care enough to do something about it, do we? But Jesus cares. He sees needs and his heart overflows, it says, with compassion. And in the end, this is a spiritual issue for us. We need hearts like Jesus, right? And to have a heart like his, we need to know Jesus. You know, that's why being here on a Sunday morning is so critical. When we come here on a Sunday morning, we don't just do that so we can have an interaction with some of our friends. That's a great thing to do, by the way. We come here because we want to know God. We want to know Jesus. Because the better we know Jesus, the more that we can understand his heart, the more that we can have the same kind of heart. I know my compassion for others suffers when I get really busy, when I'm just running from thing to thing, when I stop pursuing Jesus. I know giving a care becomes more and more difficult when I become overwhelmed with everything else going on in my life. The thing is that compassion, it doesn't come naturally to us. We're not naturally compassionate people. We need Jesus to do some work in us, to give us hearts like his. And so Jesus sees and he has compassion, and then he does the thing that I think can change the world slowly but surely. He gets busy. He goes over and he does something about the situation. He gets busy. He sees her, he has compassion, he gives a care, and then he gets after it. He does something about it. Because it's not enough that we just see the need and we feel bad about it. We have to do something. We get to do something. Right? We have to get busy doing something to serve the other person. You know, I wish that I had been more like Jesus the other day. I wish I'd seen the need for what it was, cared a little more, and did something about it. Because I could have. But I chose not to. And certainly not every moment is like that for me. Okay? But I hope that there will be fewer and far between. Because I want to be more like Jesus in this story. I want to be more like Jesus, that the world around me might be in chaos, there might be people demanding my attention, but when I see a need, that I would have the capacity to care enough to actually do something about it. And you know what? As 21st century Americans, we have just about every resource we need to be able to do something. The one thing that we don't often give ourselves enough of is time. We are so busy, we are so harried, we are so hurried through life that we don't even see the needs, let alone care about them. We don't have enough margin in our lives to even do that. And I love what Jesus does. He's got a busy calendar, but he just makes margin. He's like, yeah, I know we're going there, but I'm going to go over here for a little bit. You can keep walking if you want. That's fine, but I'm going to go over here and create some margin so that I can care for the needs of this woman.